So after the design phase is over and construction is getting ready to get going, the project's been approved, the pre-construction phase starts. And the most important part of this phase is that we get tree protection fencing up before construction begins, before anything happens on the site if we can. And typically, I'm not going out and putting up any fence. I'm inspecting fence. I'm telling people where to put fence, helping them interpret the plans for that. And the most important part of that is meeting with the construction team before construction starts. So at the kickoff meeting, if the arborist is there, I find that that's so important to the success of a project, and that so often trees are injured at the very first day or first couple of days of a project. And if we can get involved early, we can avoid some of that happening. Pay attention to your local ordinances. So for example, in the city of Portland, there are strong requirements for signage on the tree protection fencing, but know what's important in your area, not just through the ordinances, but through the health of the tree. So in California, we have these hot, dry summers. We know on construction sites, there's going to be root loss and maybe some compaction. So we need to get water on these trees, and that irrigation of trees on construction projects in California is hugely important and helps their success. This is also a good opportunity to do any tree care that's needed. Most often, I see clearance pruning so that we don't damage the trees more than we have to when the equipment's working near them. But maybe this is a good time for pest management or something else that's important in your area. You'll know what those are with your local focus. Once we have our tree protection fencing up, construction is going to start. They're always very anxious to get going. And basically at this point, what we're doing is we are monitoring root loss and root damage. There's lots of other ways that we can be involved in these projects, but that's the biggest and I'd argue most important. So what we're going to do is we're going to watch them or come after they've done an excavation and damaged roots, and we're going to assess whether the tree can survive the level of root loss that it experienced. And we can help make sure that all these roots are cut as cleanly as possible. And if we're there on site when it's happening, we can make sure that they're cut before they're broken and things like that. That can be really important roles for us to be as an arborist on a construction site. There's lots of other damage that can happen. So I see trunk damage. I see very often those branches ripped off where they should have been pruned for clearance before the construction crews came in. And we have very little we can do to sort of mitigate this. We can do a little bit of pruning, a little bit of other options. We really need to try to stop this from happening before it happens. And that's really by setting up our fencing and by making sure everyone understands we're not going to go in there. And if you do need to go in there, you're going to have your arborist on site with you so that we can monitor the root loss and provide recommendations on how to avoid cutting roots if at all possible. We're really trying to avoid this when we're doing our plan review. And so I showed earlier a little shot of a water line going right in between a couple of trees. And what we'd like to do is identify during the design phase, hey, there's construction happening in our tree protection zone. We need to do something about that. Because what happens when we get to this phase, we have very few options to make any changes, and we end up losing a lot of trees in this situation where we could have identified them early. So focus on the plan review portion of the of the design phase so that we can try to avoid this happening and minimize our tree loss on construction sites that was avoidable if we had identified it earlier. In California, we're going to want to measure our soil moisture, monitor that throughout the summer, advise increasing irrigation, things like that. And we can only do these things and only be effective if we have good relationships with our construction crews and be able to work well with them and be part of that team. Towards the end of the project, they start taking down fences, start planting, start wanting to really enjoy this site again, right? So I'd like to emphasize that this is a key time to be involved and try to advise your clients to have you out there, where a lot of damage can happen during planting in the tree protection zone just after the fences come down. This is really a key time to be out there monitoring, educating crews and working with them to ensure that we're continuing to protect these trees. And then often what I see at the end of construction projects is some sort of requirement where we want to reassess the trees, reevaluate their health. We want some sort of final sign-off that the companies followed, the construction crews followed the tree preservation requirements, things like that. So often we're involved, and we were both the first ones on site, and now we're the very last ones on site where people are about to move into the buildings. They just need their final sign-off. Okay, so that was a quick overview of the phases of construction and how arborists might be involved in each phase. Obviously, one of the most important things is tree protection zones. How are we going to make those, and what are they going to look like? And so Nelda is going to tell us a little bit more about that.